USB cables, universal serial bus, universal confusion. Everybody has come across a USB cable. If you're involved in the computer world and lots of other things, they're even powering up a lot of non-digital devices these days. Everybody is very familiar with that, but there is just so much confusion as to what works and what doesn't work that people usually just try it and see and can't understand why it does or it doesn't. This particular cable is one of the original ones, and it's fairly old these days, and I don't even know where I could use this particular cable to plug in, because both ends are the same. But one of the first things that we need to talk about are the two standards that accompany USB. One standard has got letters to it like USB-A, USB-B, USB-C. It also includes USB micro and mini and so variants on that. That particular standard is about the physical cables and the physical plugs which make it up. When we talk about how the data goes through these cables, that standard is with numbers, and we have USB 1, we have USB 2, USB 3, 3.1. So they're the protocol standards which are being used and in play. And people get very confused without understanding that there are actually two standards which are required to get USB working, because most of the time people look for a USB cable and the cables are labelled A, B, C, micro, mini or whatever. Now, this is the type A. If you're not already familiar with it, it's got that rectangular shaped plug on it, and if you look inside there you can see that there's two pairs of cables. And USB-A, USB-B, all of them except USB-C have two pairs of cable. I've got some USB-C here, and the USB-C cables, so I'm going to pull that out. There's the short one. So USB-A plug at one end and USB-C at the other. But there are actually 12 pairs of pins inside the USB-C cable. Partly that is so it's reversible and it no longer matters which way you put it in, so you don't have to try 50 times before you find out the right way to plug it in. It just goes in. But those extra cables also go with the higher speed protocols, USB 1 and 2. You have one pair to carry data and you have a second pair which carries power. And that's it. That's the end of story. But when you get to a USB-C, you have a couple of pairs in there connected with power. And this is where you can get the high power delivery plugs and get your higher charging rate on your devices. So if you have just a standard old USB-A cable, you will get the old charging rate, because it needs the extra pairs in the USB-C cable to understand what the capability is of the device you're delivering it to. That's called PD, or power delivery. And that also explains why some cables charge faster than others. So not every cable is able to charge at the rate of the charger that you have. So that's one thing to be aware of. The cables themselves have got different size wires on it. You can see that one is relatively thin. This one is relatively thick, heavier duty, and this one will go further distances, but in reality you can't get USB cables going more than 3 to 5 meters. So if you're looking for a really long run with USB, it's not on. You have to find some other mechanism to go ahead and do that. The different protocols for data delivery are more important. USB 1 was the original. Yeah, obviously you start with one and then you keep going up from there, and that has what we now know as a relatively slow speed. USB 2 came along and the speed doubled, and everybody was happy with that speed, and laptops in particular came out with the blue sockets to indicate that was a high speed USB ports. Then USB 3 turned up, and then 3.1, which is an order of magnitude higher yet again than the USB 2. And they're really worth it if you want high-speed transfers. And that is why a lot of the SSDs have USB-C outlets, because they need USB 3 to work. USB 3 needs more than 2 pairs to get the data through at the appropriate rate. So there's some of the things that you need to watch out for. USB 3, 3.1 have ways to manage the power delivery, as I mentioned before, the PD on there, and they will automatically adjust the rate the power is taken into a device depending on the capacity of the device to receive it and the capacity of the charger which is sending it in. Last thing to point out is that not all cables are made equal, and even good quality cables do things differently. This USB A to C is a fairly recent addition, but there is a marked difference in the types of cables you can get, because some of these cables are optimized for charging and some of them are optimized for high-speed data transfer. And generally speaking, you cannot get a cable which will give you high data transfer and the higher power for charging. So if you find a good cable which works for your charging, identify it. If you find a good cable that works and gives you high speed on your data, mark that out as well and know where to use it and when to use it. So just to sum up, USB cables, A, B, C and so on refer to the physical standards, the shape of the plugs, the number of wires, all that sort of thing. USB 1, 2, 3 refer to the protocols which transfer the data over the wire. The bigger the number, the faster they can go, assuming you have the cables and the hardware to support it.